Okay, good evening and welcome. You're joining the Church Safety Guys. My name's James, and I am joined by Paul this evening. And this is actually going to be a special pre-recorded Easter presentation. So we'll actually, if you're watching this, it's actually going to be Easter Day that we're playing this during the day. But the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight is armed versus unarmed church safety teams. And we'll get into that in just a bit. But for starters, I always like to say, our broadcast this month is sponsored by Trinity Security Allies, Jim and Wendy Howard. And you can get more information on their training services at trinitysecurityallies.com. And then also, feel free to visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com. We've got upcoming classes, events on the schedule there. And then also, if you register, usually 3 or 4 times a year, we'll send out updates on information or promotions or different things that we have going on as well. So a couple of things that we're going to do tonight. I am actually going to give away our copy of the Countering the Mass Shooter Threat. So if you registered on our website for that drawing, I am actually going to go ahead and pull up on the screen here, and you guys will get to watch me actually randomly pick somebody. So I put all the names in this cool spinner thing, and I get to hit the spinner.
Big money, big money. Oh no, wrong deal.
All right. So Jimmy.Garrett3@gmail went to our website and registered. So I'll have to take a look and do some research and email him. But if obviously you registered, so we put your name in. That book is sitting aside for you, so we will touch base with you and get that to you. Now, the other cool thing, if you haven't, while I'm putting the second list together, I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. But if you haven't noticed it, we actually have our devotional out now and is available through Amazon, and we'll be posting the link below in the comments later on. But basically, it's our 31-day devotional. It'll take you through the month, written specifically for concerns and just inspiration for what church safety guys deal with, right? So as you go through it, there's a little bit of a workout section. So if you want to get in shape, it kind of comes from our War Ready Facebook group. And then there's verses and a little bit of a narrative to kind of talk about the verses and that sort of thing. So for those of you that saw the poll, we put out a poll a few days ago on the Facebook group, and we said everybody that voted was actually going to get entered into a drawing for a free copy of it. So unfortunately, when we got into the publishing part of it, I found that we couldn't use the pictures that we originally wanted that we put up there for the cover. So we kind of had to change it and improvise it. But for the sake of still giving
honoring
it, we're gonna go ahead and put everybody's name in there, and then.
And while you're pulling that up, I want to take time to tell everybody, James has put in a huge amount of time on this thing. I came up with the concept of War Ready for the group, and then it started getting spitballed back and forth about it being a devotional. I was like, I don't have time to make this thing happen. And James is like, well, you do what you do, and I'm going to make this thing happen in the background. And I was like, okay, this is going to be, we'll see what happens. This will be okay. Now it's actually pretty dadgum cool, and we've even got some ideas for some future things to make it better, and even another project beyond it. So I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, but James, you put in a huge amount of time in the background on this thing that people don't know about, and I got to see a lot of copies and things back and forth. And so I'm excited about it. The goal of this book is not only to bless your church and people in your church. You can give it as gifts to your team members, but proceeds from things like this are going to help us continue to function. And ultimately, we want to get to the point that we can bless small churches that don't have any kind of a budget or
Mm-hmm.
have a limited budget and come in and supplement this. So literally, our goal is to take the lion's share of the income that comes from this, and it'll go to churches that need it. Some of it will be for operational costs. Some of it will be for training where we can vet instructors. But guys, this is a first fruit. And James, you put the seed in the ground, you planted it, you tended it, and this thing's starting to grow. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for embarrassing me too. That's always
welcome.
Always fun. No, I will say it's a joint effort because honestly, I wrote part of the devotional part of it, but you did the exercise regimen and then also the scripture verse. And so basically, I kind of feel like a lot of churches, they want their teams to connect and they want to be able to do studies together to strengthen it. And again, that's part of the discipleship part of a team, right? If it's a
Amen.
ministry, then you're going to be trying to pour into those folks that are serving with you. So whether you pick up a copy for yourself, and it's not a real theologically deep book. I didn't have enough space or time. But as I was going through it, I started thinking, how would I apply this verse to something that we all deal with? Paul and I, we've started this ministry out of being where everybody is right now. So realistically, when I look at a scripture verse, I would think, okay, when I'm writing this, how does this apply to somebody that's just serving in their church, and how could I encourage them, or how could we encourage them? Because we all know, as long as we've been in this ministry, that there's ups and downs, there's good and bad, with every service, with everything. So, but yeah, definitely check it out. And it is available on Amazon now. I can tell you honestly that after Amazon takes out their portion and their commission, 100% of that, yeah, right, 100% of that actually does go straight into our nonprofit with the church safety guys, and we really want you to have that. So we're working really hard. We've set up some great scholarships. I've reached out to a few churches this week. But once we get things rolling again with churches and services and that sort of thing, please reach out to us, or when you listen to this, let me know if you're a church under 500 and you don't have a budget and you're having a hard time with supplies, because we've already got, folks that are willing to, or have donated training and curriculum and just different things. And, there's a possibility that we can get you a copy of the devotional as well for your team. So there's a lot going on out there, and we certainly can't do it without the folks that partner with us and help us. But, realize that, we're here for you. So we're doing our best to pour back into, the resources that we've kind of set up to make it easier for you guys. So let me go ahead and share my screen again here, and I will pull up another random name picker for the devotional. I should have asked Paul to wear his Vanna suit. So then, all right. Yeah.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, I've seen his name a few times, right? He'll be happy that he got to do that. So anyhow, that was fun. So anyhow, Jason, if you're watching this, and I'll reach out to him early and let him know. But if you're watching this, we will have a copy set aside for you. Now, Amazon, just so you know, for the folks that have ordered a copy of the devotional, Amazon is running about a week behind. And so because they consider it a non-essential item, go figure. I think it's essential,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
But they consider it non-essential, so it gets put to the back burner. And thanks to Simon Osmo, he yelled at me today because it made him sign up for an Amazon Prime account. Otherwise, he had to pay for shipping. So he was really upset. He's like, "Now I've got to spend money," and I'm like, "You don't have an Amazon Prime account? What's my esteem of you, sir, just dropped."
Right. You unwashed Philistine.
And he's like, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to spend so much money on Amazon Prime." And I was just like, I've got nothing, because UPS.
I thought that came with citizenship. Once you became a citizen, they gave you Prime and like a Hulu trial.
UPS stops at my house daily, so, and it's usually Amazon Prime. That's what I was getting to. All right, so we're gonna talk about gun stuff, right?
Woohoo!
Woohoo! So we have this discussion often. We get asked the question a lot. What do you guys think about having firearms? And we usually try and limit some of the conversation about it, because we don't want the whole group to turn into tactical. We want to stay practical. To coin,
amen.
Somebody
coined that. I don't know who.
So, but tonight we're going to give you guys a treat. So we're going to chat about that a little bit. And joining us again for the second time is Chris Periatt from Forever Vigilant. Did I say that right?
Got it right on the money, brother. Good job.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you murdered Ozamo, but you got his name right, but you murdered Ozamo.
Oh my goodness. Simon will watch this later and he'll be like, "How could you be my best friend and say my last name like that?"
Yep.
It happens. So anyhow, Chris, thanks for joining us, and thanks for being on the broadcast this week. So we're talking about unarmed versus armed, and you and I kind of had the discussion earlier. We kind of started with insurance and different things. But for a church starting off that doesn't have a team, a lot of times we get the question, what about firearms? Should we have firearms? Should we not have firearms? And a lot of times, safety, security kind of gets interchanged, where you've got folks that just want to do security and just want to carry a gun. And I can't tell you how many times I've had people walk up to me at my church and say, "Can I join the security team? Do I get a gun?" Oh. And usually the second thing, when that's the second thing out of their mouth, the first thing out of my mouth is, "We're not about guns." So, no.
No.
But what would you tell a church? What's a good starting place for this discussion?
Well, usually the folks, when they come to me and they ask, it's, "Hey, we have some CPL holders within the church, or we have some law enforcement officers in the church, and what do you guys think about having an armed contingent?" And the one thing, having law enforcement officers there is awesome. If they're members of your church, they may want to be part of the safety team. They may not want to be. If something does take place and they take action, for the most part, they're probably going to be covered by their agency, and they're going to be basically on duty as soon as they take action. So anything that happens to them or any action they take, usually for the most part, the department or the jurisdiction they work for will cover them. And for the most part, law enforcement officers are trained. I'll go that far and say they're trained. The training in this country for law enforcement really is substandard when you look across the country. The law enforcement community, for whatever reason, just doesn't have the passion anymore. When I came on the job in the mid-'90s, I came on with all the guys that were from Vietnam. So all the guys I worked with were all shooters. And I went to the range every week, which I still do. Now, the cops that are on the job now, they want to go home and play video games. They're not into guns and shooting. They don't want to spend their own money on the range or the ammo. They don't want to spend their own time. So their training really isn't, and everybody thinks it is, but I teach on an international level, cops around the world, and I can tell you from firsthand experience. So just because you have a cop in your membership with a gun, just realize that, we talked about it before. If you've got 500 people in your sanctuary and something happens in the sanctuary and you've got people going in every which direction, are you really even going to be able to use that firearm, in that situation? That incident that happened in Texas, that gentleman was extremely lucky. The sanctuary wasn't very full, and most of the people hit the deck when that gunfire started. So he had a clear line of sight on the target, and he was able to put effective rounds on that target to put the target down. But again, that gentleman trains all the time. He is extremely proficient with that firearm, which is another thing that you have to be if you're going to carry a firearm for self-defense. James, you and I were talking about, teaching concealed pistol classes. And, I tell my students when I teach is, this is just the beginning of the journey. You can't take an 8-hour course and then never, ever take another course again, because you'll never be able to react when you have to. And if you do, you may not be able to put effective rounds on that target to stop that threat. So training is the key, and then having CPL holders or concealed pistol carriers in your church. If they take action, you might have a civil litigation problem there that they may be looked at as being a member of the church at that time, because there may have been an expectation that they were going to take action if something happened, even if they don't work for the church or they're not on a team. So I look at it from a criminal as well as a civil litigation standpoint. If you're justified in using force and you have to use force, then by all means use force and use the force that's reasonable to stop that threat. But if you get cleared criminally, the civil litigation is going to come around, and it may not come around for 4 or 5 years. So you better have all your ducks in a row. You better have your training certificates. You better have everything. So a church that says, hey, we have CPL holders. I say, okay, well, what kind of training does that CPL holder have? Well, I don't know. Well, you're opening up a giant can of worms if that individual draws his firearm, and even if he doesn't touch off a round, if he just pulls his gun out and points it at somebody, that might be considered brandishing, and that might be able to, or even a felonious assault. That might be a crime, right? So there's a responsibility and accountability if you're going to have firearms on your team. Do I think that churches should have firearms in the building? Yes, I do. But I think that the training should be at such a high level of proficiency, and I think that's where the problem is. You just can't send your folks to a couple of pistol classes at the local gun range and kind of wipe your hands of it and say, okay, you guys you're good, you're good, and we don't have to do anything else, because the attorneys out there are just salivating. They're waiting. They know churches have deep pockets, and we talked about it earlier. You look at Brotherhood Mutual, Church Mutual, and Guide One. The big three. They're going to have guidelines and stipulations for you if you're going to have an armed team, and they're going to basically tell you what you need to do to be covered. So yes, I think churches should but I think that you really need serious policies and procedures if you're going to have an armed contingent. And I don't think everyone should be armed. There are people out there carrying guns right now that shouldn't be carrying guns, you know?
Sure.
And I've heard that so many times. People will come up and say, oh, you know, hey, I have a concealed pistol permit and I want to be part of this. Well, if that's the only reason you want to be part of the safety team, then I'm sorry. But you know what? We got an opening in the coffee room, and I think you'd be great working in the coffee room. You know, that's where we're going to put you, because you don't need to be carrying a gun on the safety team. That's the only reason you want to be on the safety team.
So I wanted to go back real quick because you hit a couple of things, and I think it's kind of interesting because I usually say something very similar. And so when you mentioned earlier about most officers today want to go home and chill and play video games and not it, what's interesting to me is I have a lot of friends in law enforcement, and they're probably my age, maybe a little bit. And whenever we have spare time, we're always talking about going to the range to practice shooting because we like shooting. To me, it's a relaxing hobby. But at the same time, what's funny that you say that is just because a police officer carries a gun doesn't mean that he likes shooting or he likes that as a hobby.
Right.
And that's something that, I tell a lot of the folks in my class, and understanding and realizing that, if you go and you shoot once a week, you very likely could be more proficient than the average officer.
You are.
On the street. And I'm not saying that to, to pick on officers.
Nope.
I've done my share working with law enforcement, as a volunteer in reserve and that sort of thing. But the other interesting thing, I was having a conversation not too long ago with one of my friends who works for Columbus Police, and he was commenting, like, we had asked for some special duty officers for one of the larger services that we were doing. We wanted a uniformed officer with a patrol car, and he came to me and he said, well, I'll do it. I'll volunteer. And I said, but, he's higher up. And I said, what about just getting a regular officer? And he said, our overtime request boards are full. He said, nobody wants the overtime. People come in, clock out, and they want to go home. And he said, we can't find officers that will go and work the extra overtime for the income. Right. And, the other interesting thing is I noticed several of the local departments now are swinging towards hiring older people like, Paul and my age, to say, okay, you have life experience. So even though, maybe you didn't go through the police academy, 20 years ago, but we appreciate your life experience and you want to be here. So let's hire somebody that's actually older, that's going to, pull that overtime or do special duty or that sort of thing.
Right.
So usually one of the big things that I tell people is, just because with the firearm idea on that, just because somebody carries a gun, it doesn't mean that they necessarily find it as a hobby or, have spent a good deal of time. And honestly, as far as concealed carry classes go, I say the exact same thing. I've been doing it for, 12 years. And, I get a class where somebody's like, okay, holstered up with Uncle Mike's holster, I'm ready to go.
Oh.
And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, okay, so I've never been called into court in the 12 years that I've done classes. I really don't want to be called into court. So, right. In most cases, my classes, I go above and beyond the state requirements because I want to make sure that when people are more comfortable, that certainly know. But Paul, did you have anything you wanted to jump in on?
I was just thinking about all the things that go with that. I like the term institutional inbreeding. Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I like the term institutional inbreeding because you have people. I saw a meme today that said, and I have friends that are retired Marines. 3 of them were snipers, but I saw a meme today that said only 1% of Americans or not qualify. That was the wrong word. It basically said only 1% of Americans could ever be Marines, and I'm like, no. There's Green Berets and there's Navy SEALs and there's Delta Force and there's Army Rangers and Air Force has their pararescue that they could easily qualify to be Marines. They just haven't gone through the process to become a Marine. And you end up with this we're the best of the best of the best mentality, and it's not based on reality. I've dealt with it, and I have nothing but respect for law enforcement as a law enforcement chaplain, as a civilian law enforcement chaplain. Have nothing but respect for my friends that have spent time in military uniform. But some of the most frustrating conversations I have with people are people who want to join a team or serve in some capacity that they spent half a day in basic training 30 years ago on a handgun,
Yep.
and they think that qualifies them to either run a safety team, do executive protection, or something of that ilk. And you're like, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And then once they learn, and then they get training with someone like yourself, Chris, they have that aha moment. They go, why didn't we learn this in basic? Why didn't we learn this in the academy? And I've heard that from so many friends,
Right.
because now they know what they don't know. And then they become my friends who are training junkies like me. So anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, and I'm not tearing on cops. I spent 25 years as an active law enforcement officer and 6 years in the Marine Corps. So I spent 31 years of my life in government service, and I'm a professional gunfighter. I was paid to carry a gun, and I understood what that meant to be a professional gunfighter. I have been in my share of incidents where I didn't know if I was going to go home that evening to my family. So I have been there and I have done that. So I'm not tearing on cops, but I think churches get a false sense of security just because they think they have a trained professional in their membership or in the sanctuary. And what you need to realize is I really need to look at that individual's background. What is their lineage to allow them to carry that firearm? Now, and that's where, how about, churches that say, well, I'm just going to have a cop. I'm going to hire a cop to stay at the front door, and that's fine. If that's what you want to do, that's great. But what I always tell them is that, an officer can only be in one place at one time. So if an individual gets past the officer with a firearm or an edged weapon or something and commits an act of violence, it's going to take that officer time to get there. Or what if that officer is targeted right out of the gate and that officer goes down?
Exactly.
Now, because we've seen that. We saw that at the CIA complex attack. We saw that at the in Washington, D.C., when that crazed gunman attacked Congress and he shot the officer at the metal detector. So it does happen. It does happen. So there's pros and cons, and that's what I love to say. There's pros and cons to every decision that you're going to make. Does every church need an armed contingent? Probably not. Probably not. But you know what? I would rather you have trained professionals in your membership just in case something happens, that they are there, and that if they have to take action, they can take action. But they have to be trained professionals, and that's the key. That's the key. So
one of the things you mentioned too, I want to go back to is the insurance continuum of that, and that's when somebody comes up to me or a church comes to me and says, hey, we were trying to decide if we should do lethal or less lethal options. Usually the question right out of the gate that I say is, have you talked to your insurance company? And usually I get the deer in the headlights look where they're like, no, who?
Right.
And at that point, I will say to them, like I mentioned to you earlier, okay, pick up the phone, call your insurance agent, and find out who your insurance company is through, because there are insurance companies out there, like you mentioned earlier, that want to add a rider to, the church policy for someone having guns, for less lethal options. And, and I've seen where insurance companies actually require certain training if you're going to do like less lethal options. Now, there are a lot of companies out there, such as, I know we have Brotherhood, and, I'm pretty content with them, but they take kind of a different approach to it. They're very much like, we don't care what you guys use or what you do. We care more about the action that you're physically protecting someone. But, I've had long conversations with them, and I've said, okay, if the church were to be sued because I did, A, B, and C, I carry personal liability insurance because I don't want someone coming back and trying to take my house or, that sort of thing. How does that fall in? Do I need to have my own insurance, as I'm carrying at the church, or does the church kick in? And so that's all stuff that, especially if you're just starting off, I know we have a number of pastors that also watch the broadcast and that sort of thing. But, that's a quick conversation to find out, because again, I know several churches that have come back to me and said, our insurance company won't let us. Mm-hmm. The only thing they will do is they will allow us to hire a special duty or off-duty officer for that service. But they want, somebody that has that training that's been through the police academy, that has that city, the liability is covered, and, kind of go from there. So from that standpoint, it can be, it can be a challenge, because then you're also, for a smaller church, you're looking at, okay, for a church that can't afford afford to pay someone, what do you do at that point?
I think that's where a lot of them look at the membership and are looking for police officers in the membership already, Sure. But when I started out my career, I worked for one of the most violent cities in the country, and it's still one of the most violent cities in the country. And it was in our policy that we had to carry our handgun off duty as well. So you may find officers that don't carry their handgun off duty, and maybe go to church and don't have their firearm. So that's something that a lot of folks just can't believe. But I know a lot of cops that don't carry a gun off duty. They just don't. And they just don't want to be bothered by it, So that might be something as well, that if you do have law enforcement in your congregation, in your membership, you may, and if you're on a safety team and you aren't allowed to carry guns, and you talk to that officer, that might be one of the first questions you ask, is that, hey, listen, I know you're a law enforcement officer, do you carry your gun in church? Do you carry that off duty? And they may tell you, no, I don't. I don't carry my gun off duty. And that's just a choice that they make. Right or wrong, it's a choice that they make. So that's something to look at as well.
Yeah, I know in the past, for me, we've had several off-duty officers that have come, and we have one that serves regularly and helps us with traffic, and he comes in uniform. We don't ask him to; he just volunteers and does that, and he always checks in with the city every time he comes out. But we've had other officers that were off duty, and and we had one situation a couple of years ago where I went to one of the officers and I said, I was wondering if you could help with our safety team. And he just flat out said, you know what, I'm in uniform 24/7, and this is my time with my family. And, I really don't want to do that. Right. And so he's like, he would carry a firearm because we're in technically Columbus limits, and Columbus, is a city that, regardless of if you live there, if an off-duty officer comes in, they require you to carry, a firearm.
Right.
It's just their company policy. But with this particular individual, I respected him, and I said, look, I understand completely. I would not want to be working when I'm at church. I wouldn't want people calling me and saying, hey, can you take your laptop to church, church today? Give him a break. Now, they were gracious. This particular individual was gracious enough that when we had something go on, I grabbed him and he was like, what do you need? I'm happy to jump in and help, because he knew the situation.
Right.
But yeah, those are all very good, very important questions to kind of ask. And we've gone one step further, which you also kind of alluded to, and that's, we don't require people to be on the safety team to carry a firearm at our church. But what we do require is for you to go through a special training program. And, whether you're on the safety team or not, if you're going to carry in the church, you need to go through this program. And it's built very much like the Ohio police officer requirements for shooting.
Yeah, OPADA, right?
Yeah, OPADA. But the interesting thing, and I get people look at me crazy all the time when I talk about it, but the interesting thing that I've said to them is, look, I've been teaching gun classes for the last 12 years. I understand that, not every military guy knows how to shoot a gun. Not every CCW or CPL holder knows how to shoot a gun.
Yeah, that's really true.
And so, with them, I've said, look, if I ask you to go through this training class with one of our instructors that is, very skilled, it's for everybody's safety. I don't want you downstairs carrying a firearm around the kids with, not knowing that you have a secure holster, not having a good set of mannerisms and rules and that sort of thing. So, now I will say that a lot of times people will join our safety team. They will go through the training class for fun. But we've never said that was a requirement for our safety team. And so we have a portion of, our safety team does carry. And then within that portion, we have individuals that we've pushed and we've trained far more to a higher level to respond tactically to stuff than the average person. And we offer that based on an interview process and that sort of thing, but we actually have things in place where we train with one of the local departments. They come in and we run through tactical scenarios with those officers.
Yep.
And that's for us, that's just to try and make sure that we're able to respond and do things quickly and until law enforcement gets there.
Right.
But,
yeah, that's what I like, that approach of having a combination team, of having a really solid, well-trained group of individuals within the safety team that are going to carry. Not everybody needs to carry a firearm. I like to have a contingent of both unarmed as well as armed safety team members at the campus. And then depending on how many campuses you have, it can kind of equate to how many armed people you're going to need, how many folks you're going to have like service, if somebody's off sick or somebody's on vacation, do I got to fill in with folks? So there's a lot that really goes into it, but I really like that. And then, with the armed contingent, it all comes down to the policies and the procedures that you're going to have to be a part of that team. What is your training going to consist of? Are you guys going to train once a month for 4 hours or 8 hours? Are you going to do it every quarter? Do you have to put rounds down range every month? No. you have to be a very well-rounded team and have a well-rounded program. You're going to have to add in, observation skills training. You're going to have to add in de-escalation training. You're going to have to add in force on force training. You're going to have to add in subject control, defensive tactics. And I mean, that's a giant package right there. So there's so much more than just going to the range and shooting. And that's what you're going to have to find the right people that are going to understand that. Just like a police department, we're only going to be able to train you so much. It's going to be up to you personally to have that intestinal fortitude to go out and do the training on your own. You're going to have to spend your own money and go to the range. I love that Paul's got a range in his backyard. That's awesome. I have a range across the street. I have a large state land across the street from my house. And I was over there the other day. Somebody threw out a bunch of tires. I saw a possibility, and I built my own range out of junk tires. I put a bunch of logs, dug a pit, and I built my own little range out there on the state land. So now I've got my own range right across the street. But I come from a different generation. My family was military and police, and I went in the military, and I know how important training is, and especially if you're going to carry that firearm to defend your life. And then also, I think one of the other aspects of it is what happens if this situation doesn't call for a firearm? But what if it calls for you putting your hands on someone?
Sure.
Majority of the people in this country have absolutely no idea what to do in an unarmed combative situation, in a fist fight. They have no idea how to control people. They just don't. If you're lucky enough to have those folks on your team that have a background in that area, you definitely want to bring them on because disorderly folks in the sanctuary. What if you have verbal arguments? You have a domestic situation that there's not a physical assault, but it's just verbal, and you need to get those folks out of there. I have a lot of churches that they want to carry OC spray, and I tell them, OC spray is great, but what happens when I'm out in the lobby and I blast somebody with OC spray and everybody in the lobby gets contaminated? Now everybody's contaminated. Yeah, exactly. So, and those are the things that you have to think about. But if I have to go put my hands on somebody, do I know what to do? Do I know how to properly escort that person out of the sanctuary or out of the lobby and get them outside? And I think that's one of the big areas that everybody loves going to the range and killing primers. Everybody loves killing primers. But when it comes to people having to put their hands on people, for whatever reason, they don't want to do it. And I can tell you from 25 years as a cop, I put my hands on people every single day. Every single day, you're putting your hands on someone. You're not pulling the trigger every single day. I don't care where you work. You're just not. So those other aspects of training for your entire team, whether you have an unarmed team where if you don't have firearms, that subject control program is going to be so incredibly important because, if evil walks into your church that day and you are able to stop it and you don't have a firearm, you better be up to date with those other skill sets so you can stop that threat. I look at that incident in Texas, and when that individual had that shotgun in his pants, I don't know if he put that in his pants outside in the lot or if he stuck it inside and did it in the bathroom. But observation skills, pre-threat, pre-attack indicators would come into play right there because as a cop, I looked for that stuff. I looked for that behavior, and you need to teach that to your people. He walks up to the gentleman with the serving plate. Man, that serving plate's a great improvised weapon. hit him right upside the head with that serving plate, the collection plate. But that person, that usher, was never taught how to recognize pre-threat indicators, because that bad guy, I was trying to get through the screen because he was just giving them off and giving them off and then he pulls a short-barreled shotgun out of his pants. That took a little bit of time. Close the distance, and long guns are so much easier to control than handguns. They're so much easier. If I am close enough to you that I can touch a handgun or a shotgun, I'm going to take it out of your hand, because I train to do that, and I train all the time. And we will use simunitions, and we will prove our point. And you stand there in front of me, finger on the trigger, and I will take that simunition gun out of your hand, and you will miss. You will not hit me, and you can prove it. So that's the kind of training, because what happens if you have an incident in your sanctuary, in your lobby, church is getting out, and you've got hundreds of people in your lobby, and an incident takes place? You can't draw that firearm and use it. Bullets, unfortunately, don't curve. They don't arc. It's going to be line of sight, line of bore. And you're going to have to close into the threat, and you're going to have to go hands-on. Well, you need to be trained to a level of proficiency, just like with the handgun, on how to do that. And I think that's a big, big area that a lot of teams are missing, is that unarmed combatives discipline within the safety team. And that's something that both the unarmed as well as the armed contingent, weapon retention, for an armed contingent. What happens if you get into a situation with an individual and he goes for your handgun? There's a lot of systems out there that I'm telling you, and unfortunately, when I got on the job, I started with one, and it's a garbage system. It's garbage. It does not train you properly in a real world situation when somebody's trying to take your gun. And I have personally had 2 attempts on my gun in my career of 25 years. I had 2 individuals, 2 separate incidents where they tried to take my gun. And let me tell you, when you look down at your gun, when you feel tugs on your belt, and you look down at your gun and it's not your hand on your gun, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, because you're like, that's not my hand. Someone's trying to take my gun out of my holster. You better know what to do right then and there. And that's something else that needs to be taught. Weapon retention, weapon disarms, both handgun, long gun, knife defense, all of that you have to be a well-rounded. It's got to be fully encompassed into that training program. And you only have 12 months out of the year. That's all you got. So if you're only training once a month, you've got 12 4-hour or 8-hour blocks with your volunteers. That's where you really have to have someone that can put that training into place far enough ahead and really get good training for your people. Because if they do something, you don't want it to come back and bite you. I've been sued in both federal and state court, and I have never, ever lost a civil case because, one, I knew how to write a report, and I had all my certificates and all of my training, and I know how to testify on the stand because of my training and my experience. And that's something that I think a lot of churches, that they don't realize that when you call the police, the average response time in this country is 8 minutes. That's the average. If you have a church in a large metropolitan area, it may be longer than 8 minutes. It may be. If they've got multiple incidents going on, especially we're all in the Midwest, if it's February and a snowstorm came through, it might be longer than 8 minutes. So you might have to deal with that problem yourself until the cavalry gets there. And if your folks aren't trained to do that properly, you could run into a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, I like going back to, you mentioned the pre-threat indicators, and the thing that kind of sticks in my mind. I was actually talking to Simon on our last broadcast about this, but we really need to change our focus from always I don't know. Maybe it's because firearms are cool. I'm not really sure, but that's probably the number one question that we get asked by churches is, if we set up a safety team, can we can we carry firearms? Can we do with that? And to me, it's like, okay, wait a second. Let's invest some more time into the de-escalation. Let's invest. I think it was the Dylan Roof case where he said if somebody had stopped him, if somebody had gone up to him and greeted him before he got into the classroom, then he would have probably left the church and not not shot and not engaged with the firearm.
How long did he sit in the car? Right? He sat in that car, in that parking lot minutes. He didn't have a rover outside. Nobody saw him. What if you would have had a parking lot attendant that just would have walked up and talked to him? Hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
Did you want to come in and see the church? Did you want to become a member? Whatever. Those are those kind of things that you have to look at behavior. It's not necessarily a gun problem. You look at the behavior. What are the physiological responses of that individual that it's out of the norm, right? It's out of the norm. You guys talked about it before when you had the gentleman from Trinity on. If you see an individual that walks in church you've never seen before, boom, he's automatically greeted. Bad guys want to stay in the shadows. They don't want to be seen. They don't want to be heard, right? They just want to kind of lurk in the darkness and go right past you. But what I always tell folks is with all those different layers of security that you should have, if that individual is greeted every time he turns around and someone's sticking their paw out to shake their hand and say, hey, how you doing? I've never seen you before. Welcome to our church. He's going to be like, you know what? I think I'm going to try the church down the road because every time I turn around, somebody's shaking my hand and greeting me. And these folks are really paying attention to what I'm doing, and I'm never going to be able to commit my crime. And that's what you have to have. And it doesn't matter if it's a greeter, an usher, the folks that are holding the door, folks that are helping the handicapped people off, all those different layers of security you need to have within the church. And all that's going to do is that is going to harden that soft target for you.
Absolutely. And that's, when we first started, I like to keep track of, we call them incidents, but when the safety team responds to something, we would document every single time, okay, this is what happened. This is what's going on. And then what we would do is actually classify it. So I would break it down and kind of divide to see, where the majority of our time was being spent, whether it was like a medical incident or a security related thing, or maybe it was just a property service or, a fire, or everything kind of had its own category. And what was interesting was starting off, we saw probably 80% of what we responded to was actually medical. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, and this was a couple of years ago now, about 2 years ago, we started seeing a trend and shift. And part of it was because we had informed our congregation more that we had a safety team, that we were looking at people. We started to see a shift of people reporting, see something, say something type mentality, where people were like, oh, hey, this person came in, can you check them out? And, and we'd go up and we'd greet them and that sort of thing. But what was interesting, and it still is today, and I know we've talked about this before in other times, other episodes, but when you have the majority of what you're dealing with not even related to firearms, it's kind of like, okay, so if I can't handle this without that and make rational decisions and make good decisions, then I don't know that I want to compound a problem and add this in here, because then that just adds a whole nother dynamic of, okay, is the person trained well? Can they mentally handle, the discernment? And there have been a few, over time, there have been a few people that I've worked with at different churches that I've said, you know what, this person needs a lot more training. I'm just going to be honest. I love you, brother. I'm so happy that you're involved in this ministry, but guess what? you need a lot more training. You need to go to someone like, like yourself or a company that, all you guys do is training and start at the basics. That's great. But you need a better foundation because you need to be able to mentally handle, everything that goes along with that versus just,
Right.
putting a gun in a holster, once a week on Sundays.
Yep. That's right. Exactly. It's got to be all encompassing, fully encompassed in your training program. And if you're just going to the range and you're just punching holes in a bullseye target, you know what? The first time I put you in a force-on-force scenario, we're going to dispel the myth. We're really going to see it. Really, we're going to see it. I had a young lady who she went through my active shooter force-on-force class, and she was a competition shooter, but she only shot steel and paper, and we all know that stuff doesn't shoot back at you. And she peeked around the corner, and bad guys started shooting at her. And she came back around the corner, put her back up against the wall, handed me the gun, and she said, "I can't do this." She goes, "I've never had anybody shoot me." And she goes, "This is the first time I've ever had this." She goes, "I cannot do it." And I was like, you know what? I'm glad you found out here and not out on the street.
Yeah.
Because something would have happened. I'm glad you found out here. But, that's the thing. And I'm sure you guys see it as well with your folks, that, going out on the range and, hey, I got, sub-second draw from the holster and get my first round on target. That's all great. But if that target is moving and actually shooting at you, it's a whole nother world. And that's where that force-on-force training, I love force-on-force training. I would much rather have simunition training or airsoft training. Going to the range is very important. Don't get me wrong. You have to have those foundational skills, but there's nothing like force-on-force training. You get smacked with a sim round or a BB, and it wakes you up. It really does wake you up, and it really it reinforces good, solid tactics. It really does.
Even just, honestly, one of the ways we trained was just even walking around, like we set up barrels and stuff like that, but just walking around and shooting, right? Because you're thinking in your mind, okay, I'm going to be standing still, but the reality is, okay, if I walk, I still need to be accurate. I need to be focused on, on that. And the last time I went out, was actually a couple weeks ago with some friends of mine, and we were doing some drills and different things like that. We even had it where somebody was getting ready to shoot, and then one of the other guys would come up behind him and scream like a drill sergeant in his ear, and just be like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like rattle him. And of course, the guys came to expect it, so they were like kind of prepared, like, okay, what's what's he going to do? But even just something simple like that, it's enough of a distraction to throw in there.
I used training batons, and I'll stand a shooter with a training baton, and as you start the drill, I will start to strike you with the training baton, and you have to fight through that pain because it's a training baton, so it's just plastic wrapped in foam, but it hurts.
Yes, they do.
I'll take my focus mitts, or I will take a strike shield and I'll hit you with it as you're shooting. Or I've done a class with Kevin Dillon from Lockup, and he will take you by the belt and he will just jerk you around, and you have to wait until both feet are planted, and then you can get your shot off, and then he jerks you around again. So anything you can do to really get that cognitive thought process and get them focused on what they have to do right now, and just kind of forget everything else, and whatever you can do is great, because that's all that's going to do is build up that stress level in them, and then build up that confidence so they know, hey, under stress, that's no big deal. I can handle it. I can do it.
I know. A lot of it is just your mental preparation to be able to say that, okay, I'm okay with him coming up and pushing me or grabbing. And the belt, that's actually what we did too. Like one of the guys that serves with me came up behind me and grabbed my without telling me, grabbed my belt, and he's about twice my size. So he kind of yanked me back, and I was like, okay, I wasn't expecting that.
Yep.
But it was fun times.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Well, wrapping it up, Paul, did you want to add anything or say anything?
Sorry, Paul.
On my end, I'm getting a little bit of interference. So I'm sitting here like decoding everything as you're saying. So if you see me like closing my eyes and listening and then nodding, that's because on my end, there's a little interference. I loved what you said though, Chris, a little bit ago about training in environments where people shoot back or they grab you and bump you. Because I was asked to come in as opposition force, a bad guy for some training for a department, and the Swiss cheese by a whole bunch of guys, and it wasn't as easy as they thought it was going to be. And there was some attitude of, oh well, this is the civilian coming in, we're going to turn him to Swiss cheese. And then the second day, the guy in charge of the department actually grabbed me and said, hey, grab that airsoft carbine and get in the stack. And I looked at him and he said, one of my guys had to leave. You're up. You're going to fill his place. And I was very deeply honored. And then he got people because he went to set the scenario and they had everything stacked in place. And I was second from the back of the scenario, getting ready to go in. And all of a sudden he starts shooting off blanks out of a 357 Magnum. And he had gone around behind us in this enormous building, and all of the actual officers just went, and I took off running, and I slid up against this column that was about 16 inches thick, and all I could think is one of two things: either these are sim rounds and these are blanks, or there's an idiot who's come in here and he's trying to shoot unarmed cops. There's only two ways this ends: is either I die or I pelt him with every airsoft pellet I've got until somebody can get there and really take him down. And he walks around the corner and he's looking, as I'm leaning around the column, he's looking at my rifle barrel and he goes, huh. And he's like, so the civilian is the one that took me out. And you can just tell he's like, we'll talk about this later.
Yep. Yep.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Well, we definitely appreciate you joining us tonight, Chris. We'll go ahead and wrap it up. Anything else?
May 23rd is my self-defense pistol class up in Centerline, Michigan. I told you, both of you guys got a free slot. You want to come up, and I'll put you through 8 hours of pretty hardcore stuff. You guys have a lot of fun.
I'm actually, it's still kind of in this part of my brain. I'm still trying to figure out logistically how I can do that. Hopefully we're away from all of the virus stuff by then, because I'm
outdoor range. It's an outdoor range, and I'll keep everybody 6 feet apart, so we don't have to worry about it. So you get a free lunch out of it too.
I'm bringing my snorkel.
There you go. I'll put a gas mask on you. We'll be good to go. Yeah, no problem.
He's gonna have
Chris
a mask.
reaches up and plugs it.
Crazy. All right, sir. Well, it was great to visit with you again. So thanks for joining us. Happy Easter. All right. So that was Chris with Forever Vigilant. So it's always fun when he's able to chat with us. So our topic tonight was armed versus unarmed. Hopefully that was beneficial to you guys and kind of helped with some thoughts for you to take back and consider. And we'll wrap it up tonight, but we hope that you had a blessed Easter today and this weekend. And I definitely know it was a little bit different this year because of not being able to go to church in person and that sort of thing. But we'll have to have a physical Easter celebration when all the virus stuff is done and gone. Amen. Hopefully soon.
Amen.
So, but anyhow, thanks for joining us tonight. Again, visit our website, churchsafetyguys.com. Check out our new devotional on Amazon entitled War Ready, and you can type in my name or Paul's name, and it should come up as we're celebrated and famous authors now, something like that. So anyhow, let's go ahead and close in prayer, and we'll call it a night. So, gracious Heavenly Father, I thank you for the opportunity that we have to gather together again tonight, and just ask that you bless this time, that this information would be useful and helpful to those listening, and just protect us, keep us safe this weekend, and help us to remember the true meaning of Easter and what it means for all of us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. You guys have a great evening and great weekend, and be blessed.
Happy Easter.